1943, a drawing office at Nuffield Mechanisations and Aero Birmingham. A set of blueprints is unrolled across a long table. Engineers study the dimensions. Numbers are circled, numbers are crossed out, bigger numbers replace them. The vehicle being designed is not a tank. It carries no turret. It cannot spin to face a new threat. It can only face forward, absorb punishment, and fire, and it is growing heavier with every revision. By the time the first prototype rolls out of a British factory, it weighs 78 tons. It moves at 12 miles per hour on a good road and 4 miles per hour across open ground. No standard bridge in Europe can hold it. No standard landing craft can carry it. Moving it from one place to another requires two 12-ton tank transporters chained together and a special-purpose 80-ton trailer. It looks, frankly, enormous. It looks immovable. It looks like the product of engineers who were given no budget ceiling and no weight limit, and were told simply to make something nothing could kill. And in that narrow sense, they succeeded. Its front armour was 228mm of cast steel, thicker than a King Tiger. Its flanks carried 152mm, nearly double the Tiger II's side protection. Its gun could punch through 311mm of rolled homogeneous armour using discarding sabot ammunition. More penetrating power than any other Allied anti-tank weapon of the entire war. It would be ordered in batches of 25, reduced to 12, reduced to 6. It would arrive at the battlefield 2 years after the battlefield had ceased to exist, and it would fire its gun in anger exactly never. Its designation was the A39 Tortoise, and it was the most powerful thing Britain ever built on tracks. To understand why the A39 existed, you need to understand the problem Britain faced in the spring of 1943. The Allied High Command was looking east across the French border towards something called the West Wall, known to the Allies as the Siegfried Line, 630 kilometres of fortified concrete, running from the Dutch border south to Switzerland. 18,000 bunkers, dragon's teeth anti-tank obstacles stretching as far as the eye could see, interlocking fields of fire covering every approach. The planners who studied it understood one thing clearly. Conventional armour would not be enough. Something different would be needed to break through. In April 1943, the Secretary of State for War and the Minister of Supply submitted a joint memorandum to the War Office. It was remarkably candid. The document acknowledged that the anti-tank gun had pulled ahead of tank armour, and likely would stay ahead, but it argued that a proportion of specialised assault vehicles, small, slow and very heavily protected, might survive long enough to suppress the bunker lines and allow following infantry to get through. The memorandum called for a vehicle with at least 6 inches of frontal armour, something modest, something bounded. Nuffield Mechanisations received the contract. The first sketch, designated AT1, weighed 45 tons and carried a 75mm gun. That was May 1943. Then the General Staff intervened. They wanted a bigger gun. Nuffield redesigned. They wanted a bigger gun again. Nuffield redesigned again. Through 18 successive design iterations, the vehicle grew. A 6-pounder autoloader was considered. A 17-pounder was specified. Then a 32-pounder. Each gun upgrade required a larger fighting compartment. A larger compartment required thicker casing. Thicker casing required more weight. The weight required more engine, more suspension, more steel. The Nuffield Vice Chairman, Sir Miles Thomas, wrote directly to the Procurement Office in August 1943 to warn that the design had ballooned from 45 tons to 63 tons and that the weight growth was becoming unmanageable. The War Office noted his concern and proceeded anyway. By February 1944, the finalised design, AT-16, weighed 72 tons. The production vehicle would weigh 78. What the memorandum had called a small machine had become the heaviest armoured fighting vehicle Britain ever produced. The vehicle was a casemate assault gun in the Continental tradition. No rotating turret. A fixed armoured superstructure bolted to a hull built around torsion bar suspension, and a Rolls-Royce Meteor engine producing 600 brake horsepower. The same Meteor family powered the Cromwell and the early Centurion, and it was proven, reliable, and fuel-hungry. The Tortoise carried enough fuel for 45 miles of road travel and 25 miles across country, after which it needed resupply. 7 men crewed it, a commander, a driver, a co-driver, a gunner, 2 loaders, a machine gunner. The 2 loaders were there because the 32-pounder used separate loading ammunition. The projectile and the propellant charge were loaded independently, a time-consuming process that required muscle and coordination in a confined fighting space. The main armament was the Ordnance QF 32-pounder, a 94mm gun derived from Britain's excellent QF 3.7-inch anti-aircraft weapon. Its barrel was nearly 6 meters long. It fired an armour-piercing composite ballistic capped round at 930 meters per second and an armour-piercing discarding sabot round at 1540 meters per second. In post-war firing trials conducted at Hohne Ranges in Germany in 1948, the 32-pounder tore through a Panther's frontal armour at 950 yards as if it were not there. One round ripped away a Panther's gun mantelet, deflected through the roof armour, and came to rest under the turret floor. The trajectory of the shot destroyed everything in its path. It carried 60 rounds. 3 Bisa machine guns in 7.92mm provided close defence. A small rotating cupola on the roof housed 2 of the bases and had to be fitted with safety cutouts because test engineers realised the crew could accidentally fire into their own roof hatches. The front armour casting was extraordinary. 228mm of steel poured as a single piece, one of the largest single armour castings attempted by any Allied nation in the entire war. The sides were 152mm. The maximum effective thickness around the gun mantelet reached 279mm. When compared directly to the Tiger II, the most feared German tank of the late war, the Tortoise was better protected on every surface except the roof. No weapon in the German infantry could reliably defeat it from the front. The Tiger II's own 88mm gun would have struggled to penetrate at practical combat ranges. The Jagdtiger's 128mm Pak-44 could achieve penetration at close range, but only under near-ideal conditions. In the environment the A39 was designed to operate, advancing slowly into fortified positions with infantry close behind, the armour was essentially invulnerable to what waited on the other side. If you are following along with this deep dive into British armoured engineering, hit subscribe now. It takes a second, costs nothing, and means you will not miss what comes next. Now before we continue into what trials actually revealed about this vehicle, and why it never reached the front, consider what Britain's adversaries and allies were attempting in parallel. Germany had the Jagdtiger, 71.7 tons, the same casemate concept, the same total absence of turret traverse. It was faster at 35 km per hour, but its sides were only 80mm, nearly half the Tortoise's flank protection. The famous tank commander Otto Carius, who led a company of Jagdtigers, recorded his profound disappointment with the vehicle. Mechanical failures and fuel shortages destroyed more Jagdtigers than Allied guns did. Approximately 80 to 88 were produced and saw combat before Germany's collapse. None of them performed as intended. Germany also had the Panzer VIII Maus at 188 tons, more than twice the Tortoise's weight, with frontal armour of 200mm and a 128mm main gun, alongside a coaxial 75mm. 2 were built, neither saw combat. The Maus required a 14-axle railway flat car to move, and could not cross any bridge that existed. It was not impractical. It was physically impossible to deploy. The Americans built the T-28, also called the T-95, 86 tons, frontal armour of 305mm. The T-28 was slower than the Tortoise, reaching only 8 miles per hour maximum, and carried a crew of only 4. Its 105mm gun was excellent against concrete, but lacked the armour penetration of the 32-pounder discarding sabot round. 2 T-28s were built. One was destroyed in an engine fire. The surviving example was abandoned at a storage depot and missing for decades until rediscovered at Fort Belvoir in Virginia in 1974. The Soviets approached the same tactical problem from a completely different direction. Rather than building a near impenetrable individual vehicle, they produced the ISU-152 in thousands. Its 152mm howitzer fired 49-kilogram high explosive shells that did not need to penetrate armour. They removed Tiger turrets through sheer blast overpressure. Soviet doctrine prioritized mass, mobility, and industrial production. It was a different philosophy entirely, and it worked. The A39 production story is a study in institutional inertia meeting strategic irrelevance. The tank board approved at 16 in February 1944 and ordered 25 vehicles directly from the mock-up stage, skipping the prototype phase entirely. The expected delivery was September 1945. The cost was £141,666 per vehicle. Production moved at the pace the casting work demanded. The enormous single-piece casemate fronts were among the most complex armour castings attempted in Britain. Nuffield kept their workforce occupied, converting Centaur anti-aircraft vehicles into engineering tractors, while waiting for the foundries to complete the hulls. P1, the first prototype vehicle, was assembled from mild steel rather than armour plate, standard practice for test vehicles, and was not completed until 1945. Germany surrendered in May 1945. Japan surrendered in September 1945. The Siegfried line, the entire reason the Tortoise existed, had been breached by conventional armour, exhausted infantry, and field engineers at a cost of over 250,000 Allied casualties. Every bunker the A39 was designed to silence had already been silenced, or occupied, or rubble. In September 1945, the order was cut from 25 vehicles to 12. In February 1946, the Defense Committee cut it again to 6. Between 1946 and 1947, 6 complete vehicles were delivered. The Tortoise had arrived at a war that no longer existed. The 6 vehicles went to work in the only role left available: testing, evaluation, institutional curiosity. P4 and P5 were shipped to Germany in 1948, where the British Army of the Rhine was quietly assessing whether European road and rail infrastructure could support heavy Allied armour in a potential confrontation with the Soviet Union. The Tortoise was driven on autobahns, through urban areas, across varied terrain. The suspension delivered a surprisingly smooth ride. The Rolls-Royce Meteor ran reliably. The vehicle worked mechanically in a way the Jagdtiger and the Mouse had never managed. It simply could not reach the places where it needed to work. Every standard Bailey bridge in Allied inventory had an upper limit of 40 tons in basic configuration. Reinforced variants reached perhaps 70 to 75. The Tortoise exceeded them all. Any assault crossing of a river, any advance through built-up terrain requiring bridge transit, any port loading operation required infrastructure that did not exist and could not rapidly be created. The vehicle that could survive anything could not go anywhere. P5, named Arromanches after the Normandy landing beach, conducted the most dramatic work of its short life. At Hohne Ranges in Germany, it fired the 32-pounder against captured German armour. It destroyed Panthers. It demonstrated penetration figures that post-war analysts found genuinely impressive. The gun was compared against the Centurion's 20-pounder in parallel trials, and in most respects outperformed it. The conclusion reached was clear: the weapon system was outstanding. The platform it sat on was a dead end. P1, the mild steel prototype, was sent to Larkhill for gunnery comparison trials in 1949. Test crews were given strict instructions not to drive it more than 10 miles. They drove it further. It broke down seriously. In 1951, it was sent to the Tank Museum at Bovington, in Dorset, where it has remained ever since. In 2011, museum engineers restored P1 to running condition after roughly 60 years of silence. At Tankfest 2011, the oldest living A39 Tortoise moved under its own power for the first time since the early 1950s. 78 tons of wartime ambition rumbling across a Dorset field in the July sunshine, 2 years before the Berlin Wall fell, long after the Cold War it might have been repurposed for had also ended without a shot being fired from its gun. P6, the last of the 6 prototypes, was delivered without an engine, without a gun, a bare hull. It was sent to Kirkcudbright training area in Scotland and used as a range target. It sits there still, among rough grass in a designated site of special scientific interest, stripped of everything that once made it formidable, visited occasionally by historians and curious walkers who find a vast rusted hulk in the middle of nowhere and understand eventually what they are looking at. Returned to Birmingham, 1943. The blueprints are still on the table. The engineers are making it bigger again. The weight is climbing. The gun is growing. The war outside the window is accelerating toward a conclusion nobody in that drawing office can foresee. The Tortoise was not fast. It could not cross a river without a pontoon bridge capable of bearing nearly 80 tons. It held enough fuel for a single day of operations. It had no turret, no radar, no night vision, no ability to engage targets beyond its 40-degree arc of traverse. It was, by every modern measure of tactical flexibility, a failure, and yet it was the most heavily protected armoured vehicle Britain ever built. Its gun penetrated more armour than any other Allied weapon of the war. In trials, it was reliable where comparable German designs were catastrophic. In the narrow set of conditions it was designed for, deep covered advancement into prepared concrete fortifications, it may have been the only vehicle in any Allied arsenal that would have survived the attempt. The Siegfried line was breached without it. The men who crossed it paid for that with blood the Tortoise might have saved. That is not sentiment, that is arithmetic. 6 vehicles built, 0 rounds fired in combat, 1 still running in Dorset, 1 still rusting in Scotland. That is not failure. That is the cost of a